We are back with another episode of the Marketing Millennials podcast. I am here with Olivia. We're going to talk about a channel that has probably been around longer than most channels out there, but it's still growing and it's still having a renaissance. And I think people are still underutilizing this channel, I would say. And I mean, there are companies that don't underutilize it, like you'll know, like injury attorneys and stuff like that. But there are a lot of tech brands that are in the space that are starting to come on to this channel. But I'll let Olivia introduce herself and give her background, and then and how she got into marketing, and then we'll get into the episode today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. It's so funny, like, how did I get into marketing? I've only ever been in marketing, and it's sort of at the same time, fell into my lap a little bit because I went to NYU for undergrad. And I always say that NYU is a really tough place to go to school when you don't know what you want to be when you grow up, because everybody there is so committed and so driven. They have so many specialty programs for, you're in the Stern School of Business if you want to do business. If you want to do acting, you're in Tisch. I actually was a history major, more on the pre-law track. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I took the LSAT twice. I got the same score both times. And I thought to myself, oh, I'm not really improving here. I don't think that this is for me. But one thing that people told me was that I should get some real work experience before I decided to stay in school a little bit longer. And so I actually started interning at AOL, America Online. At the time, they had just acquired the Huffington Post, TechCrunch, Engadget. It was a lot of, premium publishers at the time, but then also they were building, sort of a digital ad tech stack. And I worked on the marketing team, and I worked on the marketing team there for almost 8 years. And the second I got there, I knew, oh, I want to, I want to pursue this full time. I want this to be, what my career is in, and I want to stay here after I graduate. And I sort of have pretty much had every type of marketing role that you can have since then. Predominant focus on B2B and advertiser marketing, but I've also dabbled a lot on the consumer side, of course, on the brand side. And at the same time, I shouldn't be surprised that this is where I've ended up, because I've always been a very brand centric person. I love brands. I love marketing. I'm very I'm obsessed anytime somebody does a rebrand, or I've always just been really super into that. I remember being a kid and watching Super Bowl ads before YouTube even existed. How could you find them on the internet type of thing? And that Britney Spears one, Pepsi, was my favorite. And I would just watch it over and over and over. So it's yeah, I've always been into marketing. Of course, this is how I sort of ended up.
So I have a question for you. So you came through companies that were, I would say, digitally first companies. And now you made a bet to go to a medium that isn't really, it's coming up on the digital side,
yep.
But so you made a bet to go into billboards. Why did you feel so strongly for that channel?
Such a good question, and one that I get asked a lot, because I did spend most of my career thus far on the digital advertising side. In between AOL and where I am now at the OAAA, which I'm super excited to get into, I worked at a tech startup called Flowcode, which was a QR code company that was really started right, sort of quasi pre-pandemic, but really took off because of the pandemic and just the need for contactless connection. And a lot of what we focused on there was how do we help DTC brands scale offline by trying to think about how they could potentially get similar metrics to digital metrics in the offline world by leveraging things like QR on print, on out of home, on TV. So I started to dabble in the offline media space, and quite frankly, I grew up also in New York City, which is just the epicenter of incredible out of home. I've always loved billboards. I've always been somebody that has really been aware of the branded world around me as I sort of experience life. So when this opportunity came across my desk, it was really a no-brainer for me. One, because I love the medium. Two, because I had sort of already been dabbling in the space. And I also, as a brand-centric person, and I saw the way that digital advertising, especially social ads, were really moving to ugly ads perform, and it just like wasn't for me. I was like, oh, that's like, had a visceral reaction to that sometimes. And I was like, why not like think about how to do like big, beautiful, creative, like in the real world. I also feel like people were sort of post-pandemic wanting to like experience even more, out in the real world as well. So it was a combination of a lot of things, plus the team there. I had known some folks for quite some time, and like the leadership is just really strong. So it was like good people, a medium I loved, the opportunity for just, real growth. And I think that like the combination of that all together was just like really enticing for me to sort of like pivot from a very digital centric advertising role to something that, to your point, obviously, over 30% of out of home right now is digital out of home. So there is a digital trajectory, but it's really the combination of both.
I will say one sign that I think out of home is a big deal and and technically like an organic driver too is watching the billboards at Coachella this weekend and seeing Hailey Bieber reposting the Yahoo billboard, all these artists doing some funny plays as you drive into the desert. Because if people don't know, unless you fly into Palm Springs, it's a 2-hour drive from LA or San Diego or Laguna to drive. And I just saw tons of artists, brands, people just posting billboards on their feed. And I thought that was like, okay, if you could do something creative like that, it has that digital, because nobody's screenshotting a Facebook ad and putting it on their story. Nobody's doing that. But
what's really interesting? There's so many different layers to what you were saying, and I wholeheartedly agree with all of them. The first is the Yahoo thing, which is that's a mock-up, right? And so if you're thinking about Yahoo as a brand doing a mock-up of a billboard on social that's getting reshared by Hailey Bieber. Like, that just goes to the essence of how powerful the medium is, that it's not even an actual billboard. It's just a mock-up of a billboard. And Cracker Barrel did the same thing, actually, when they reversed their brand. They put an image of their old logo on a mocked up billboard, posted it on social, and they're like, we've heard the feedback. So, you have this medium that is sort of the symbol of trust and the symbol of visibility and the symbol of something that, when people see it, they instantly know, they instantly have, I think, a really positive feeling around it. Also, they just have a connection with it as well. So I love the Yahoo example because, first of all, that wasn't even a real billboard. Number one, they're just leveraging it for social and is amplified in so many different ways. Two, your point is exactly spot on. I mean, the road to Coachella is just like an unbelievable display of incredible out of home. And I think just, further proves the power of the medium because, it's not that it just lives there in the desert for only the people that are headed to Coachella to see. Like, it is so amplified across so many different channels. And I think, that's another thing that really makes the medium so special is just its ability to interact so well with other media. Like, it doesn't just live in a silo. The whole goal of it is to really be like this sort of connection piece in the middle of your media mix to sort of connect to social and, to any of your other digital experiences, potentially, of course, even TV or CTV. So, I just think it's so cool to see. And I love that there's like certain times of year where people, really give out of home its shine and its moment that it deserves. So yeah, this is a cool time of year for us.
Yeah, I think, it's an incredible local channel too. And people don't think about local as hard as other people. I lived in LA for 8 years and you would see all like the local billboards of trying to get their, to be considered for like Emmys and Oscars and but I want to go into, you recently got promoted to CMO, and I want to say like, what is like how are you trying to change this perception like for people to invest in this channel? I think there's still, there are brands that get it and know that it's a channel, but there's a lot of brands that still are, I'd rather just go run Meta ads. I'd rather run Google ads. It's measurable. It's this, it's that. I can't measure out of home. So how do you change the perception?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, OAAA is the trade association representing the entire out-of-home industry, and we are celebrating 135 years this year. So for 135 years, this organization has solely been dedicated to protecting, promoting, and advancing the out-of-home industry. And from a marketing perspective, I view my role as like having like two very clear goals, which is one, how do we better engage the broader advertising community to ensure that out of home is an essential part of the conversation, is an essential part of people's media mix? The work that we do around that can be anything from showing up in all the places where, big advertisers and all the agency executives are, places like, Cannes Lion and Advertising Week and CES, and then also, putting my vertical hat on and making sure that like across the categories that are really doubling down in ad spend and in out of home specifically, that we're making sure that we develop those relationships, that there's always an out of home conversation to be had. It's really just like inserting ourselves in there as much as humanly possible. That's one piece of it. The other piece of it is really just on developing those relationships with brands and agencies. We have a brand council. We have an agency council. We do a ton of events, whether they're local sort of discover out of home days in specific markets. We also put on our annual conference, which is coming up next month, which is pretty much the largest out-of-home gathering in the world. But my goal with that event is also to ensure that it's not just out-of-home people in the room talking to out-of-home people, right? Like, how do we bring a broader advertising mix into our mix to ensure that, out-of-home isn't just sort of this like siloed media channel and like, is an add-on to some plans. I think to the point that you were talking about before with Coachella, when we sit sort of in the center of a larger plan, you can see it work just infinitely better, right? So, from a marketing perspective, it's really about evangelizing the medium, building the relationships with the right folks to ensure that conversations are being had in the right place. And just, I think, one thing that we can even do a better job as an industry is sort of like touting a lot of our success and a lot of our wins. I think, things like Coachella, or obviously this is a very big year for advertising in general, but for specifically out of home because of things like FIFA, World Cup. There's obviously Super Bowl. There's sort of these moments a couple times a year, and especially this year, it's also an election year, right? Like you're going to see a lot of political out of home ads as well, or get out the vote ads. So, there's sort of these like, peaks in the year that essentially I think really remind marketers that, oh, this is a channel that really works. This is a channel that has stood the test of time. This is a channel in undergoing transformation and innovation. And I think the more that we're super vocal about it, which is what I feel like is the essence of my job, the more you sort of open people's eyes to like all the different things that the medium can do, whether that's programmatically or, like there's just so much innovation and transformation happening.
So what's really cool, I think, about out of home, and you're saying this, I mean, last year it was $9.46 billion channel, and it's had 19 quarters of consecutive growth. So what do you think, at what point does out of home stop becoming like a comeback story and becoming like a maturer channel in the mix? Because I feel like it is still at this like, okay, you're seeing more big advertisers go into this channel, because we'll talk about later, but you calling it the human median as well. So at what point do we start saying, and for some brands I would say it is a mature channel, but how do we get, I know you said that, but how does it stop becoming this like comeback story channel?
By the way, I think that's a really good question. I will say, like, in my 2.5 years, like being in the out of home space, I personally have experienced, I feel like, a fundamental difference in the way that marketers and the broader advertising industry interact or wants to interact with me from like 2+ years ago until now. So I think you're sort of already starting to see that change for sure. I think on the flip side of it too, and this is why, from a vertical perspective, that we, especially for this year, are focusing on a couple of very strategic verticals, because I think if we can prove out tremendous success in some of these areas that get a ton of attention, it will sort of open up the floodgates to everybody else as well. But I think, listen, at the end of the day, we sort of live in an environment and in a society where everybody's sort of chasing the shiny object all the time. And like, there's aspects of out of home it's not the shiny object because it's a 200-year-old medium, right? Like something 200 plus years old is not necessarily going to feel new and shiny all the time, right? But I think that's where some of that, innovation, transformation, programmatic development, digital development, and sort of the general digitization of the medium, the more that happens at scale and the more I think, bigger conversations we have, the more, listen, take somebody like Alex Earle and what she just did to launch Real Actives, where like the billboard that she had in New York City with the puzzle pieces was like an essential part of the launch, right? Like, I don't know if something like that would have happened 3-4 years ago, right? It's like you sort of are starting to see this turn happen. And that's why there's a lot of amazing examples that we can talk about right now of just like really interesting things that are happening in our space, because like the tide has turned, but it's like, it's also at the same time still turning. So I hope that we get to a place in the next, I don't want to even say years, I think shorter than years, where it's like we're not talking about this comeback story or, like a renaissance for out of home, but more just like sort of the fundamental essential nature of it for any brand that is looking to, build a meaningful connection with the consumer, tell a visual and like very powerful story. And at the same time, there's also that both sides of it. You hit upon it earlier, which I think is so true. It's like you can be a big advertiser like an Apple or a Verizon with, just like a big brand awareness campaign, or you can be a local advertiser and leveraging out of home directionally, or, like Cracker Barrel does that. They're obviously a big national brand that uses it from a local perspective. There's just a never ending amount of things that you can do. So I think the more we tell those stories and those anecdotes and show them off, I think the more that they'll just become ubiquitous.
Yeah. A great example of a brand that does very good local is Buc-ee's in Texas.
Yeah.
As you drive and there's a bunch of billboards saying like you're close, like 101 miles to this, and you can get this at Buc-ee's, and this like funny things at Buc-ee's and bathroom. But it's like the whole drive, you just reminded that you can go to a Buc-ee's, and that's a great example.
And when you're ready for it, like it's like was right there at the top of your mind.
I wanted to ask you, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, digital out of home advertising is now a third of the revenue of all out of home. Where does that ceiling sit comparatively to just like regular out of home advertising? Because digital, the cool thing about digital is you can run a spot for an hour, or you can run a spot for 3 weeks if you really want to, and you could run it. I see a lot of like when SaaS brands now during conferences, they run quick digital out of home targeted at like San Francisco or Boston or something to get quick advertising with. So where do you see the ceiling of digital out of home versus traditional out of home?
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if there's a ceiling per se, because the more signs that are digitized, the more opportunity there is. So, obviously there's like hundreds of thousands of different signs and formats across the US, and the more that those transition from static to digital, the more opportunity there is for digital. So it's kind of a really super exciting thing, because I don't think there really is a ceiling on it. There's also so many different types of formats within the out-of-home ecosystem that are digital as well. Obviously, like cinema is a piece of that too, right? And like that's sort of, when you think about out-of-home, a lot of people just think about billboards, so they're just thinking about digital billboards, but there are so many different signs. Of course, there's transit and street furniture, there's airports. So the digitization of any sign in the US, like to me, that ceiling really doesn't exist, or it's exciting that, it feels like it could be potentially, infinite, because we're sort of just underway in terms of the digitization of the entire medium, which is many, many different formats in our overall ecosystem.
And I wanted to, I know we're in the age of AI now, and I think, billboards are tech in the real world. They're not on your screens, that you pass it driving to work, you pass it walking, you see a bus or a car, or have these digital, you go into grocery stores, you see digital, out of home advertising. I want to go into your positioning of this and the thought behind it, and what are you trying to get with calling it the human medium?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that question, because since I joined OAAA 2+ years ago, we've sort of been endeavoring on this positioning work. And I think a lot of it stemmed from the fact that, as an industry, out of home is so many different things. And there are, just the OAAA has 850 members, right? So it's not like when you're going up against search, you're really going up against Google. There's not like one, we are a conglomerate of a lot of different amazing out-of-home companies. And, at the end of the day, the importance of us being unified as an industry, aligned on our talking points, aligned on our core value proposition in terms of like what makes the medium great and a worthwhile buy. The reality is, and I'm not just saying this because I work in the out-of-home space, but there's probably like dozen, and any different company could put together, their own set of, core beliefs as to why, out of home is, a worthwhile media buy. And I think, what we wanted to do was sort of sit down and pull all of that together in a way that any of our members, and really anybody in the advertising industry, could really just like come to an understanding of like what really makes this medium so special in sort of a singular way, which again is a very daunting task. And it was a massive undertaking just because, I wanted to ensure that there wasn't like a reductive element to it too, because there just is so much positive things to say about the medium. But that being said, we spent a lot of time talking to brands, to agencies, to technology providers, of course, to out-of-home media people, just really getting a lay of the land of just how they view the medium. I think also the gap that we were trying to solve between like how out-of-home people view the medium themselves versus how buyers view the medium was just another like area to solve for here. But, at the end of the day, a lot of this sort of like real world notion and the really deliberate like impact and connection, it just kept coming up over and over and over, of course. And I think, in a very AI centric world that we live in, and listen, I love AI. I think AI is, well, I shouldn't say I love AI. I think AI makes people's lives a lot easier. I think it's an amazing enabler, and I think it helps people. I'm not one of these people that thinks that like AI is going to take everybody's job. I think AI is going to make everybody better at their jobs. And I think like that's where I say I love it, because
no, you have to tell AI you love it, just in case there's a
just
chance.
In case it comes for you.
Yeah, just in case AI does take over the world. You were spokenly on a podcast.
Fan.
Yeah, early
just
fan.
Reference this podcast. No, that's exactly right. But at the end of the day, especially because think about like during the pandemic times too, which like I always hate like bringing up the pandemic, but like we have to be real about the fact that like digital consumption skyrocketed. People got really used to like just doom scrolling, being algorithmically driven, discovering new like everything was so digital, mobile centric. And I think like what we're seeing now is sort of this visceral reaction to people just wanting to be like out in the world and living their lives again. I remember even like pre-pandemic, there were so many studies that came out that were talking about millennials, and this is the Marketing Millennials podcast. So it's relevant. But, people were talking about how much millennials loved experiences, right? And I still think like that's still innate with like this whole cohort of a generation. They just had to take a few years off because of like the state of the world. And so everybody's coming back with a vengeance, essentially. And so when you think about all of these things together, where people like want to be out there in the world, but like we live in a very sort of like tech immersed, like digital centric world. And you don't know like the things on your phone, if it's real, if it's fake, if it's an AI video, like, you just want to exist a little bit. And I think like that's sort of all of those pieces, we put that together, to really just land on like out of home is the human medium. And it's for humans, right? Like, that a human being with real eyes is going to see your message out in the real world. And I think, there are other channels that do have issues with that. Just if we're being frank, right? And so I think playing to our strengths, but also playing to that sort of like emotional connection. There's a lot of aspects about humanity in general that I think also lend themselves really well to out of home too. Like we think a lot about, and we've talked a lot about on this podcast about it, how out of home works better in concert with other media, right? So too, like other human beings need other humans. Like people function better, when they're in a community or, when they're around and surrounded by others. So there's just a lot of things in terms of like personifying the medium with really human qualities, but also the essence of the human being the one that is, really being targeted and really the person where these messages are being delivered to, sort of all came together. And we just thought it was a really beautiful way to start talking about the medium in a way that could exist, well into the future.
I think that what you said about, I think the in real experience, the real life thing making an advantage, because this is, I used to go to Coachella like 2014, 2015, 2016. And till now, for like the last 10 years, I never saw like, I saw people going, but I never really saw like the hype that this Coachella brought versus like the last 10 years. And I think it was all bring back like to 2016 vibes, 2016 headliners, like 2016 music, all millennial stuff that was what Coachella was. And that's what I think that like this Coachella with ticket prices being so crazy, it was never like that. 10 years ago, it was like that. Getting a Coachella ticket, it would sell out and you would have to go in the market, sell it in an hour in the market. The last 10 years, you could buy it on the site till a week before it happened in this year. But I wanted to go into one thing. I know we've been talking about how great of a channel, but I want to know, like, based on all the billboards you've seen, and you've seen a lot, how could brands win on this channel? Like, what is some tactical things that if a brand wanted to enter the space, like how could they make their billboard actually produce, let's say, brand awareness, or on the other side, actual conversions to site?
Yeah, that's a great question. And by the way, speaking of 2016, it just got me thinking about how like that whole social media trend of everybody like posting like where they were in 20, like there is sort of this like return to a different time, but like a previous time. And I do think that our medium is benefiting a lot from that. When it comes to out of home, or really when it comes to any media, I always say, like, what is your KPI and what is your call to action? I think a lot of times people put a message on a billboard and they were like, well, did it work? And it's like, well, what did you want to happen, right? And they can't really ascertain, sort of like what the proof of performance or what the metrics were that they were actually looking for. And I think, we talked a lot about on this podcast as well that there's just so many different formats of out of home. And I think, you could leverage it from a proximity standpoint. You could leverage it from a big brand awareness campaign standpoint. You could have an amazing, discount or offer. You could build out a unique landing page. Like you could partner with a creator who shares it on social. Like, what are you trying to do? And I think a lot of times people just sort of slap a message on a sign and they're like, we did out of home, but we don't know how it performed. And I would say some of the rigor that brands really do apply to other channels, I think that sometimes that does get a little bit lost with out of home, just because some brands are potentially viewing it as sort of an add-on to a campaign. So I would say being really upfront about like, what are you trying to get out of this? How are you using this particular sign? What's the message for this sign? And then going from there, because I think you do see a lot of brands use it in a lot of different ways, but the ones that keep coming back to the medium have cracked the code for themselves, essentially, right? And I think that's because they have really strong KPIs and they have a really strong call to action, and they know exactly what they're using which sign to do what for. And so I think if you're strategic about out of home in your plan up front, you will have the same results.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to test it these days. Like you could do, like we talked before, a local campaign, see if lift in that local area came up. Like I used to, I see a lot of brands doing that. If you like you could do it based on events that are happening, like conferences, or where you know your audience is going to be in that area and you want
Yeah.
to be top of mind. There's so many reward, but I think the issue is what you just said is if you're going to play on these moments, you got to think of it like how, because I think we are in the era, and I think this is why you went to out of home, but we are in the era of like creative and brand having a renaissance
Yeah.
again. And I think if you're not thinking about having that good one-liner on your billboard, having good creative on your billboard, having something that's going to stand out when someone drives by, like you saw in the Coachella, some of the ones that got screenshotted at Coachella are the ones that stood out. The ones that didn't stand out are not being screenshotted and putting online. So I think thinking about that as it's not also an ad that I took from Facebook and I'm putting it as a digital ad, or as an ad I put as a banner ad that is on other sites, and now I'm making it a billboard. It's a total different channel. And you have to understand like nuance of neighborhoods. Like what's a joke that would happen in Philly versus the LA versus Coachella audience versus, I think those are things where you have to really understand market if you're going to go into some of these markets and play.
By the way, and that is something that I actually super love about the medium is that like if you phone it in, like people are going to know you phoned it in, right? Like you're sort of, I do think that there's a little bit of an intimidation factor with the medium a little bit, especially from a creative perspective, because like you are on full display. Like it's not like with social media where someone is just going to scroll past and it's not going to, like they are going to see it and they are going to evaluate it and they are going to think about it. And, you know, the OAAA has an award show called the Obies. They're now in their 84th year. And it's like, yes, of course, there's a lot of like the big national brands that spend millions of dollars, but there's also local brands that win as well because like the creative is so strong and so unique and so really makes you think. And I think that, to your point, I totally agree on a creative and brand renaissance. I think there's a lot of expectation these days just because, you know, the reality is a lot of people have a lot of skills now because of social media, right? Like they can teach themselves how to design, and there's amazing tools like Canva where everybody essentially is a little bit of a designer. So people go out in the world and they're sort of, you know, I'm not using the word judge in a negative way, but like they are reviewing what they are seeing and they are assessing it. And so I do think like there is a little bit of a higher expectation for out of home. And I just think that is to the absolute strength of the medium.
I also think just like CTV and TV, I think since it's an older channel, I think it gives you more it makes you seem like a bigger brand than you really are, even if you aren't a bigger brand. And I think that's one thing I think about it when I think of but also I think now more than ever is when you're doing a digital out of home, like don't think of it as a one way to just that as your amplification. I would make it so good that you want to run a Facebook ad promoting that, like as an ad on Meta. You want to screenshot it and put it as an organic social post. You want to put it in an email campaign. So I think that if you're doing out of home, you also got to think of it as an omni-channel play. Where how could I use this creative on multiple channels to get the best bang on my butt? Because sometimes that is the benefit of out of home is taking that New York Times Square screenshot, putting it on social. It's that I'm taking it in a beautiful location, screenshot social. And then sometimes it's such a good creative that you want to promote it on multiple channels. And I think also people don't think of that when they're putting out an out of home campaign.
I absolutely agree. I do think that, you know, that's why we always talk about it as out of home being just like an amazing amplifier of other channels. But like if you can get the creative right on out of home, it sort of makes your job easier on every other channel, because it definitely is the hardest medium to design for. But if you can get a message that you are trying to deliver succinctly, uniquely, creatively, like into that sign, then you can just take that and run with it everywhere else. And I I can guarantee and will promise it will make the rest of your campaign that much better.
I mean, since we're talking about millennials, and I want to talk about Gen Z in this channel too, but I mean, millennials grew up mostly online. How is out of home resonating with them differently than they resonated with their parents or the generation before? Like, how is there a way to render? Is there a difference between generations?
I love that question.
Yeah.
I think there definitely is a difference with generations. I think, I think about myself as a millennial, and maybe my experience is a little unique because I grew up on America Online and then I went to go work there for almost a decade. But, I feel like there was an element of human discovery online for millennials when they first got on the internet. And, the Gen Z, I think you're sort of almost seeing a little bit of a reaction to being so algorithmically driven, where you're being I don't say force fed in a negative way, but you are being shoved content that the algorithm thinks that you will like or that you've previously engaged with, instead of you as a human being potentially discovering something really on your own. And I think that's where out of home is really special, because not only are you able to discover things on your own, you're able to discover them in the real world and not just on your mobile device. So I think we as millennials, and the way that yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly. We grew up on the internet, but we grew up in a very different internet that exists today. Where it's not the echo chamber essentially that we live in now. It really is everybody was doing their own thing on the internet back in the day, right? And I think that is sort of a little bit of what you're seeing in terms of how people react to messages in the real world, because we could be in the same environment. Maybe we're both at Coachella, we're both going to see different brand experiences, and we're both going to react totally differently to them. And I think, on the flip side of it too, speaking of a place like Coachella, you can't forget the experiential aspect of it too. Experiential, and the amounts of money that brands are spending in experiential now, just let's talk about another comeback or bounce back. It's tremendous. And it is a form of out of home as well. So it's all the ways that, human beings are discovering and interacting with brands in the real world, sort of innate to the millennial experience, just in a little bit of a different environment. I don't know if you feel the same way as a millennial, but I feel for me, I love to when I see something even when I see something on the internet too, but just generally, if I see something on TV, I'm the type of person, if I'm watching a documentary, I'm researching it on my phone at the same time. I like to discover information, but more on my own terms, I think, than sort of how this, these next generations have grown up, which is just being given information and being told sort of what to do with it versus being more of that discoverer. And I think that's the difference.
And I also think what you just said, when people think of these channels, there's always been, and through all life, there's always been a distraction happening. People say they don't want to go and see TV because you have phones, but back in the day, you would just turn and talk to your family while an ad goes on. I mean, that was the old, there was more of that. You had a neck to turn your head when an ad comes on. It's there's these excuses made on channel, but I think at brands today, since there's so many ads going out and there's more ads than ever going out in the world, the distractions are there. But if you could be in more places where you get eyeballs, and on places where there's less distraction, when you're on your computer or your phone, you have so many more distractions than I'm driving in a car and the only distraction is other cars and there's an ad right there. You're not looking on your phone. That's the distraction. Or I'm walking on a street. The only distraction are other people, maybe things going around, but it's right in front of your face. And it might not be. I
also think our attention, though, is less as a society, though, just because we're used to literally, we always say with out of home, it's just really have to capture somebody's attention between 3 to 7 seconds. You don't even get half a second on social media these days too, right? So I just think it's also the attention span of some of, essentially how people are being wired now, just because of the use of technology and how that changes when they get into different environments. And I think, listen, if you have a great ad, no matter where it is, like you will capture somebody's attention, whether they're on their phone, whether they're having a conversation, whether they're running for a bathroom break, right? Like if something piques their interest, like they're going to pay attention. And I think that gets back to your point on just the creative renaissance. Like no matter where the good creative is, I think you can really capture somebody's attention. I just think some environments like ours are a little bit easier than others.
Yeah, and I think what you just said, the difference between it, I think people mistake attention for impression, and that's the problem. Like just because you're getting impression doesn't mean you're getting intention.
Great,
and
I agree. Yep.
And that's the problem with a lot of these channels. It's like, okay, you're getting 1 million impressions, but how much attention of those impressions are you getting? And that's the real question. I mean, you can see it on site, but it doesn't mean like you're actually getting good attention from those ads that you put out.
I think the other thing too is, when I left AOL, and a lot of the time I spent working with DTC brands, and I know that you probably have a lot of familiarity with this as well. They were just so hyper-focused on performance and all of the metrics that they were getting from all the big channels. And, I think we've sort of come to realize that, like, maybe a lot of that wasn't so real. And, like, how much of that was fraud and bing, bang, boom, right? Like, we could go down that whole path. And I think there's sort of, marketers today out having a little bit of a, counter reaction to that, where it's like the balance between awareness and performance. Like everybody went so far into the performance bucket before realizing that some of it probably actually wasn't as truthful or as real or as viable as the metrics showed. And sort of the pendulum is swinging a bit back to be a healthy balance between awareness and performance. And I think a channel like ours really allows people to do that in a very beautiful way, because to the point earlier, like you can use different signs to drive different messages to deliver different outcomes. And I think having that balance is really important today. In the past, I think a lot of DTC brands in particular went into the offline world or invested in out of home just so people would think that they were real brands, right? Like it's not an Instagram brand. Like this is a real legitimate brand. You're going to order something from this company and you're actually going to receive it, right? Like we sort of lived in a little bit of a time where people like were even unsure with respect to some of the brands that they were engaging with and interacting with on the internet, if they were even real. They came to out of home to prove their realness, right? And I think that's just like another incredible attribute of the medium, where it's like goes back to that sort of like trust and viability factor. But I do think that like we sort of are living in this world now, and I hear it and I see it from a lot of brands, where it's like the healthy balance between both performance and awareness and having a full funnel strategy is like, those are the brands that are successful. And a medium like out of home, it like serves various but really important aspects in that. By the way, so do all other channels. But everything has to sort of have a role in its place. And I think we've really leaned a little too far in sort of that like performance only bucket that I think that's sort of also what is sort of part of what's rising the out of home tide, essentially.
I also truly believe that people are mistaken of like performance marketing a little bit, because I think out of home, these brand first channels, I would say, like, that have been known as brand, are really performance channels, but for your bottom line, like 9 months or 6 months down the line. Like you're betting that I want to stay relevant 6, 12, and I need my brand to have a brand when that happens, because as you spend more on performance, the bucket starts shrinking, because you already captured this. You're early adopters, and then you have to go to the next bucket, which is even harder than the next bucket that's really harder. But if you're building brand and you becoming that cooler company or the better company, or seen as like the brand that people want to be, it makes performance marketing way easier.
100%.
And that's the problem. I want to ask you this, because I ask everybody in this podcast, but what is a marketing hill you would die on?
Ooh. Wow, what a good question. I think just exactly what you're saying, like brand fucking matters. Like it really does. Sometimes I as a human being like can be like so nitpicky on some things, whether that's like creatively or design wise, whether I am a consumer of the brand, whether it's a brand that I'm working on or a project I'm involved in. I think sometimes people get like a little lazy when it comes to brand and they don't realize how important it is. You know, I've watched a couple of interviews with the founder of Poppy. She talks a lot about like the importance of brand and how that was essential, you know, in addition to having a great product and all the, like, having a great product is really important too, don't get me wrong. But I do think like brand really, 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 really matters. And it's never not going to matter. And that is a hill I'm willing to die on.
It's never, because at some point you're spending a commodity that has no emotional value to us, that person. And that's
I also
the
think
problem.
investing in brand is never going to be like a worthless investment. You know, even if like you get it wrong, like, and maybe you'll waste money for sure in terms of getting to a proper outcome, but investing in your brand, whether that is like the packaging, the tagline, the messaging, the look and feel, your website, like just the whole ecosystem around your brand, like it just does. It really does matter. And I think especially, you know, as people, like we are all very like subjective beings, but people like to look at things that are visually appealing. People want, you know, how are you going to otherwise capture somebody's attention on shelf if not for a great and interesting brand with color and pop and pizzazz? Like, I don't know. If something catches my eye, I'm like, why is this catching my eye? It's because, like somebody really spent time investing in the brand of it all. And to me, that always captures my attention. And I'm always like, anytime a brand that I love does a rebrand, I sit with it. I'm like, awesome. I'm so happy they spent time doing this. This is amazing. So for me, I love brand.
Yeah, I think people forget that is the foundation for everything you do, where like, even performance marketing, like, you have to have those values, that tag, that messaging, that positioning, that are here. And brand is not just that I'm going to put a house at Coachella, or I'm going to I'm going to do these like fancy campaigns. It's like that foundation of like packaging, positioning, how are we going to show, like how do we want to show up, like what do we want to like message to the world? I think people forget that's a foundation, and they think of brand as I'm spending money to put my name out there, but that's not brand. There's a difference between like branding and brand. I think that's
agreed. But I will say, like, if you have a shitty product, like,
shitty
only so far that brand can take
you. Yeah.
But I agree. It's like, if you really are investing in like how your product comes to life in a way that is meaningful and makes sense, and you put a concerted effort into it, I just think the payoff on that is like exponential.
Agreed. Lastly, where could people find you, or what you're doing with billboards, or this conference that's going on?
Well, you can follow us and all things that we're doing at the OAAA, OAAA.org. And our social is at your OAAA, and that's OAAA. It stands for the Out of Home Advertising Association of America. And our conference is upcoming. It is May 11th through 13th in Dallas. Obviously, the theme of our conference this year is the human medium, which we touched upon. We do this conference every year around the May timeframe. As mentioned, it is the largest out-of-home gathering really in the world. To your point earlier on injury attorneys, you will be excited to know that John Morgan from Morgan & Morgan is one of our keynote speakers this year. They are the number 2 out-of-home spender in the country. We also have Emma Greed joining us as a keynote speaker, a bunch of great brands, agency folks, a lot of out-of-home folks, just really important conversations on everything from programmatic out-of-home, AI, sports. We have the Dallas Cowboys joining us, as well as the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. I mean, it's going to be a great time. So anybody that's even remotely interested in out-of-home, I highly recommend coming and checking out the conference. But if there's ever any resources, questions, anything that people need with respect to the out-of-home world, OAAA can be your guiding source. So please get in touch.
Yeah, and I truly believe that it's a channel that if you should be testing. into. If you're not, and I do think it's a channel that has ROI that explodes more than just putting a billboard out in space. Like I do believe in the omni-channel play. I do believe that you have to be everywhere. I do believe that top of mind wins in marketing, and the best way to stay top of mind in the real world, not in the digital world, is out of home. So.
Well, you know, what's so funny is like when we were doing some of the positioning work, and like I'm a person, like I love an acronym, like I love letters, and I was thinking about like the O in out of home, and I was like, you know, we put the O in omni-channel, like just funny things I was like thinking about and whatnot. But actually that's how I got to like the human component. And I was like, okay, if O is for omni-channel, optimize, there's like so many great O words in the marketing ecosystem. I'm like, what's H? I'm like, H is a super weird letter. Like what? And I was like, oh my God, H is for humans. And like, honestly, like, and sometimes like that's just how all these different pieces come together. But, you know, I totally agree with your point on omni-channel. We think about that a lot with respect to, you know, the medium in general. Like it just functions so much better when it is just part of a complete strategy instead of either being siloed or as an add-on. And I think if that's one takeaway that anybody has listening to this podcast, it's like, test it. And I'm not saying don't continue to do the other things that you're doing. I'm saying test it in conjunction with the things that you're already doing. And I guarantee you're going to see a lot of success.
Yeah, it's crazy because whenever people say, when I like a channel, I always say, like, nobody says stop running meta ads, and they do perform. Nobody's saying stop running Google. There are some things you probably are doing wrong on those channels that could take some budget and put them towards the channels like out of home, digital out of home, CTV, the channels that are not those channels. But I do think that don't stop running meta ads if they're working. So don't stop running Google ads. But there's probably something, sometimes you also have to update your measurement and attribution system because that's screwing up that too. So,
well, I was just going to say that. I mean, we had the AI conversation. I do think, like, especially from a search perspective, like this whole SEO versus AEO, like a lot of channels are changing regardless, right? So if you're thinking about marketing holistically and you're thinking about incorporating out of home, you're probably also thinking about like the updates and sort of evolving the way you operate other channels as well. So I think it's very much like an influx point for marketers as well in terms of thinking about how they holistically view their entire marketing strategy, because I'm not just making a recommendation to include more out of home. You know, the reality is that you're probably rethinking a lot of the things that you're doing.
I 100% agree. And thank you so much for coming on. And
Thank you for having me.
I do think people should go check out this channel. And I'm just not saying that because Olivia is on this podcast. I'm actually thinking that I'm seeing better and better out of home out there. And I do think that if I'm noticing out of home more as a consumer, I think that it's becoming more of a channel, because I do think I'm noticing it more than Facebook ads and a good out of home campaign. So thank you so much.
Thank you.